Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Timothy Walton. I'm a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute's Center for Defense Concepts and Technology, and I'm really grateful that you've made the time to join us for what should be a fascinating conversation on modern shipboard defenses. It's during an eclipse, so we know that you had other options that you could have gone to, but I think it's going to be a really enriching conversation where we have three leaders from industry, government, and the navalist community to shed light on what's certainly a timely topic now and is becoming an even more pressing one in the future. To introduce our panel, I'd like to go down the line. First is Ms. Kim Erzin, who's president of RTX's Naval Power Unit. Her expansive business unit covers naval systems, integrated air missile defense, effectors, space-based systems, hypersonics, cyber systems, and she's an aeronautical engineer by training, so she has a high degree of experience working the programs on the naval front, air side, land side, and she's involved in multiple philanthropic boards in the Wichita and Tucson areas. Next is Mr. Paul Mann. He's a civil servant and member of the Senior Executive Service. He serves as the program executive for sea-based weapons at the Missile Defense Agency and the director for Aegis BMD for ComNavC. Mr. Mann recently completed his tour as the Navy's chief engineer and has received throughout his storied career multiple awards, including the Army's Meritorious Civilian Service Award, the Rear Admiral Wayne Meyer Memorial Award for Acquisition Excellence, and the David Packard Excellence in Acquisition Award. And then lastly, Mr. Brian McGrath is managing director of the Ferry Bridge Group, which is a defense and national security consultancy that works with government and industry clients. He's a retired naval officer and well-known navalist. During his over 25 years in the Navy, he commanded USS Bulkley, and while in command, he was awarded by the Surface Navy Association the Admiral Elmo Zumwalt Award for Inspirational Leadership, and his ship was awarded the USS Arizona Memorial Trophy, signifying its selection as the Navy's and the fleet's most combat-ready warship. He was also the lead strategist for the Navy's 2007 Maritime Strategy, and an amazing former boss of mine and dear friend. So I think we have a great lineup this afternoon, and I'd ask each of the panelists to start by sharing some of their thoughts on the current evolving environment. I'll ask a few questions, and then I'd love to open up the floor to each of you so that you can ask some of your questions and we can continue the conversation. So Kim, if we can please start with you.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Is the mic on okay? You guys can hear? Excellent. I can't see any of your faces, so this is good. But in all seriousness, it is truly an honor and a privilege to be up here with my distinguished colleagues talking about this topic that is very near and dear to our hearts, particularly at Raytheon, where, as he alluded to, we provide everything from sensing far off with the latest naval radar SPY-6 to making sure that the men and women that are on the ships are protected with the layered defense, everything from exo-atmospheric missiles to the very last line of defense for the Phalanx close-in weapon system. And so I know we're going to talk about several topics while we're in this panel today, talking about the relevancy of the capabilities we provide, as well as that sense of urgency not only we have to have as industrial partners to our government contractor and our customer, but making sure we're also continuing to not only deliver today's capability, but looking at how we're pushing technology. So very much looking forward to being a participant on the panel today and addressing any questions that you all have in the audience. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Kim. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul, and it's my high honor and privilege to be with all of you today. What a cool assignment to deliver warfighting capability to the great warriors in the United States Navy and Department of Defense. That's really the mission. It's why a lot of the people throughout this entire establishment is getting up every day to think they can do something valuable to sort of protect the United States and the people who protect the United States. That's what I do. I heard this morning the CNO talk about priorities, warfighting, warfighters, and then we characterize the foundation in a lot of different ways. But that's what I associate with as an acquisition professional and a PEO and working within the Systems Command. Here are my three main ideas that hopefully will somehow weave their way in today's panel. One is, gone are the days of AAW and BMD for the work that we do in Aegis BMD. It is integrated air and missile defense. So all of you that have studied how to shoot things in outer space or things that come from outer space and attack our ships, that's one domain, but we have to do it simultaneously. And I've been very proud to serve with Admiral Kano and others in the Navy, designing systems that work for the warfighters at the same time and not make them have to choose between one or the other. And I think we're making dramatic progress, but that is the future for some of the threats that we're encountering. So integrated air and missile defense. Another key theme, warfighters. I would just say that in addition to all the sailors sitting at consoles doing their thing, we too have to learn how to be warfighters in the establishment. We need a different and faster op tempo. We need to blast through bureaucratic barriers, and we need to think like Witties do, the weapons tactical instructors, where they're really trying to perfect operational warfighting. We need to figure out in our hallways back in industry how to function like that. I see some of my teammates in the warfare centers, the labs. We are truly an extension of the warfighting readiness of the team. And then my last key point that I hope will come up, because the threats are evolving rapidly, is, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of you have cars that talk to mothership all the time, and you're delivering software to your vehicles and iterating your designs continuously and daily. That is a model that's of great interest to us in the agency and certainly the Navy. We can't take 5, 7, 9 years to work on something. We need to confound the enemy by delivering capability continuously. So building an institutional analytic capability seems to be fundamental to that goal. And I hope we can talk a little bit about that. And last but not least, none of this is possible without great talented people. So we need to go on a campaign. I am unapologetic to all of my teammates for having high expectations on what we need and why we need it. Sometimes it's a little bit stressful having demands on people. But ladies and gentlemen, we need to up our game a little bit and go a little bit faster with what our warriors need on the front lines. And this concludes my welcome. Please welcome. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a delight to be here. I practiced good eclipse safety with my eyesight before I came in here, and then it's ruined by those sunlight lights in the back of the room. But it's really great to be with you, not only to talk about the things we're going to talk about today, but to sort of collectively do a little end zone dancing about how well the Navy is doing in the Red Sea right now. I take a great deal of pride from what those ships are doing. I pray to God every night that they stay sharp and that they don't let the easy one through. But they are doing magnificently. And they are doing magnificently with the product of the military-industrial complex. Yes, that's right, us. We're the military-industrial complex, the much maligned military-industrial complex. And they are sitting out there on ships that are the envy of the world for the things that they can do. Those ships and their capabilities are the result of action officers and requirements officers and program managers and acquisition officials and BD people shuffling through the fourth deck of the Pentagon, all working together to make good things happen. And I hope you're as excited about that as I am. I hope to contribute to this panel today primarily in perhaps some of the ways that I had experience in being a ship guy for some period of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. I'd like to ask each of you a question to start off that builds off of your remarks, Brian, on the Red Sea operations. And if we can start with Kim, please.
Sure.
U.S. naval forces are now in the largest sustained counter-air missile defense campaign since the Battle of Okinawa. Allied forces, coalition forces are cooperating as part of this campaign and also fighting And both the Navy and other countries are trying to draw lessons in terms of tweaks to combat systems, TTPs that need to be adjusted. What lessons are you drawing in terms of ongoing operations and maybe future capabilities in operations?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, we along with the Navy have been learning a tremendous amount as we have seen systems deployed, those techniques. I think we heard this morning, even from the CNO, and then at the lunchtime panel about the relevancy of continuing to evolve, not only the way we're deploying those, but how can we then take things and embed them into software enhancements, just like what Mr. Mann was referring to. I think what's important is, the men and women have 15 seconds, right, to make that decision. And so when we look at how do we go faster to get that capability out there, it is incumbent upon us to be very, very focused on delivering capability sooner rather than later. And so when we continue to evaluate and look at, what are we learning from all of that, it's how do we make sure that the products are out there? Is there ways that we can get the ability to reload software into weapons, right? That's one of probably the biggest, I think, things we want to collectively still solve with the Navy is how do we do that on ship? Because if we have software-defined apertures from a radar perspective and we can push capability out there quicker, we still have a problem with the weapon side. We typically have to unload them, bring them back, and then upload software. And so that's something we're trying to partner with the Navy on how could we do that in those cells and get advanced capability into the weapons faster.
Thanks again.
Sure.
Paul, over to you, please.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning. Three quick things. First, instantaneous from the time an event happens, as fast as we could learn without burdening the sailors with the data. We have some really talented people in the foundation, and they do brilliant things if they have the data. So I'm very proud of the work that's been done between operational forces and the pipes to get data back to the factories and, I'll call it the foundation. March 5th, something happened. March 20th, the solution to a complex technical issue was studied, analyzed, fixed, tested, delivered, and back on the ship, giving them a fighting chance. So that's one. The speed of closing the loop. A lot of us like telemetry. I just want telemetry and data back to the engineers to be continuous. The second is, ladies and gentlemen, this thing called WIDIs in the Navy for Integrated Air Missile Defense, it's critical. How the engineers see the system working and how the WIDIs and the operators see the systems working are a discussion at times. And so you need the operators to be embedded with the engineers because there's assumptions made about how the system is supposed to function, but that's not how it's going to be used by the sailors. So that dynamic is also critical. And last but not least, for this question, is we've got to pre-plan continuous real updates for the sailors. We can't just wait to react. And by pre-planning, there's one thing that's really been, what is the word I can say politely? Oh, I can't think of a polite way to say it. So I'll say it this way. Ladies and gentlemen, we're learning things in the Red Sea because of the environment that we need to replicate better here. It doesn't mean we can replicate everything, and so I understand that. But we can do better to replicate really harsh conditions, extreme conditions, that'll give us more insight to what to expect, not only for the engineers to do the designs better, but also to similarly give that organic capability on what those sailors are going to see on the ships so they can practice. We have a term called sets and reps. Well, you can't sets and reps with something that's different than what they're really going to see because it becomes challenging. So sort of that would be my good simulations and emulations and stimulating the system much more realistically than we're doing now. Over to you, young man, I think, or I'm not the moderator.
Brian, please.
Nice to be called young man. I think I have two lessons and one implication. Lesson number one, we simply cannot afford to keep dithering and delaying and whistling past the graveyard on directed energy any longer. Period, end of story. They've been just around the corner for 30 years, and we have to move forward faster with a plan. The second lesson is, as I watch those engagements and think about them from a shipboard perspective, is the importance of getting hard kill, soft kill, and eventually directed energy integration right. And the thing that's going to help us do that is an integrated combat system within the skin of the ship. But more importantly, it will help us get that right across an ensemble of ships so that a SAG or a force or a fleet can fight as a system, not as a bunch of ships next to each other, as it sort of looks like to me that we do it now. The implication that I derive from all of this is that we need, in the Navy, a better systems engineering approach. And by that, I mean no one's in charge. There's no one in charge of cross-ensemble, cross-mission area, cross-domain systems engineering, making trades across systems and across domains. The one that I think about all the time is overmatch in the integrated combat system. What is the functional allocation? What's the architecture? Which system is going to do what? Some function should be a combat system function, probably. Some function should be a network function. Some should be both. What are those? Who's in charge? Who's the common superior? Who's making those decisions? I don't think the Navy has a sufficient systems engineering organization with the horsepower it needs and the dexterity they need within the budget to bring about all of the things we need for the threats we face. Over.
Thanks, Brian. All three of you touched on creating a virtuous cycle of, say, operations, research, software-defined adaptation, systems engineering. And then you, Brian, discussed directed energy. So I'd love to get Mr. Urzen's perspective, Mr. Mann's perspective on directed energy, or more broadly, how do we shift to higher capacity, shorter range air defense that we can sustain?
Do you want me to start or you?
Yes, no, please. Go first, ma'am.
No, I've been going first. You get to go first this time,
Okay,
and then
so here's
I'll chime in
what
because
I
I
will tell
absolutely
you.
agree with our colleague at the
I
end
see
about
no
HBO.
plan on planet Earth that can sustain the scalability model for kinetic kills on everything. It just can't be done. So in my mind, it's not even a question. It's just, there's not enough money to do all the kinetic stuff that we need. So this is the Marine Corps became really good because they were always lean and they had to be innovative. I think this period that we're in right now could be, the lemonade we could make is to take this perceived not enough money for kinetics and really finish the innovation that Mr. McGrath just mentioned. So I don't see a choice. We have to do and come up with something else that's just unsustainable. It may be unsustainable already, never mind what China is doing as they grow even more. So that's my first 2 cents. It's not an option, it's a necessity.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It absolutely has to be a collection of both kinetic and non-kinetic. And when I look at what, us plus others in the industry are looking at, you're either talking lasers, you're talking high-powered microwave. We tend to think high-powered microwave is a better way to go, especially for the Navy. And so I know there's a lot of work going on in that domain. How do you do the shrinking so you've got the right swap to put on board? How do you look at deploying that on unmanned systems? That's another thing we're continually looking at is that something that you could put on some sort of an additional carrier that doesn't require people? And so that's where I think, to the points made earlier by my other panel members up here, you absolutely have to have a combination of kinetic, non-kinetic, and other ways of going after threats that are coming in because we won't have enough salvos. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And so we continue to look at where we can leverage those, as well as things, like a counter UAS. I mean, I think we have to continually look at the traditional way we've approached the demands for the Navy as, kinetic effectors. Is there things we can be leveraging in unmanned counter UAS kinds of activities to go after even those smaller threats that are coming in? I think we have to open that aperture for all of them. And we continue to look at that from a Raytheon lens, and I know that many of our other partners in the audience do the same as well, because I do think it's going to be a combination to stay relevant.
Brian, you're a former CO, and in many cases, the challenge, right, with using a line of sight effector, be it electronic warfare, directed energy, is that you're waiting until the threat's almost on top of you or relatively close range. What are your thoughts on how to break that cycle so that you can have more confidence and can actually use some of these non-kinetic systems as something more than just a catcher's mitt after you've shot everything else?
Well, not all targets are going to be on the deck. Some will come at you from higher angles, and of course, with directed energy or certain forms of directed energy, the higher the elevation angle, the more effective the radiation is. Tim works with a guy named Brian Clark. Brian Clark's one of my best friends, really good guy. But Brian Clark looks at surface integrated air and missile defense like only a submariner could. He's very interested in surface ships waiting as long as possible to take the shot. In some cases, so that they could use shorter range and less expensive interceptors. In some cases, because that's where the realm of directed energy is more effective. Bottom line is Brian Clark is right. But Brian Clark is dealing with a group of people who have spent decades and decades and decades shooting at things at 80 miles with standard missiles, trying to get max range intercepts because we could. We can't anymore. So this transition, and it would be a transition, I have no interest in trying to get the ships in the Red Sea to wait. I feel really comfortable with them shooting at max range for the time being. But until we have an integrated combat system that allows for ensemble responses to difficult threats, until we have proper directed energy weapons, until we have proper hard kill and soft kill, the people operating the systems are not going to trust that it's going to be there at the last minute or as it comes in. We have to give that to them, and then we have to train it into them over time.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
We focused our conversation really on air and missile defense threats. Wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about torpedoes, mines, lethal UUVs, lethal USVs, all these proliferating threats that we're facing, and your perspectives on these threats, but then also what are some promising capabilities that you guys think you could field in the near to midterm. Love to get your perspective, Kim, and then your perspective, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously we continue to look at what the Navy's going after, right? When we talk about, torpedoes and those kinds of things, how do we go after smaller munitions, things like CRAW, things like the next evolution of the lightweight. We're also looking at, countermine measures. How do we go after, and have smart capabilities that can go out there and not just take out anything, but take out the right things? How are we leveraging the technology to be able to evolve that? We've got a capability called Barracuda that can go after, the countermine. I think we're gonna, similar to what we were just talking about at the surface, right? We're gonna have to do all of that in the undersea domain, which has its own set of challenges as we continue to look at, deploying different capabilities down there. But I think we've got the technology and the capabilities that we're seeing being deployed at the surface and in the air that we now have to take into the undersea domain, and continuing to partner with the Navy and advancing those technologies and capabilities, and then obviously getting the production levels up so that we can support the needs.
And so you just as a quick follow-up, you view crawl as a good pathway to transition to a future anti-torpedo type capability that you can have not only on submarines, but on surface ships, for instance.
Yep. Yeah. And that's, and again, we continue to look at where do you take the platforms that we have in existence today, and how do you put different payloads, how do you put different capabilities in so that you can, have multi-mission, leveraging things that are already proven and already have, an existing footprint in the current inventory. And that's another way of looking at how do we get speed to the market faster by taking things that have already been proven and then just put different payloads and different capabilities in them.
Thanks, Kim. Brian, please.
Yeah, I've been watching the Russia-Ukraine thing like most of you have, and particularly from a naval perspective, because that's the only thing I really understand. I think it's probably not a good thing to take lasting and important conclusions from what you're seeing there. Let's face it, unmanned systems are here to stay. There's no question. The Ukrainians are important. They are making important strides, and they are doing really important things with them against Russian maritime capability. Russia's not fighting Ukraine on the seas as a fleet. They're not fighting as a system. They've got no overhead support. Their ships are out there sort of alone and unafraid, or they're pierside with a couple of, vodka-filled crew members on board. We're not talking about a systemic fleet-based response to a serious threat. Don't get me wrong. I think even in a systemic fleet-based response, UUVs are a tough threat. UUVs are also really hard to build, especially weaponized one. You can, throw a bomb on a rib and send it at a ship relatively easily. Getting an undersea vehicle close to or into the side of a ship, a tougher thing to do. One of the things we have to do as a fleet is invest in overhead support, the ability to survey the waters around us all the time and to take care of business when we see these small boats, these USVs, these jet skis, or whatever they are coming at us. We are, the 60 Romeos on the ships are gonna go out of commission in 2035, and we've got no answer for that right now. Start doing the math, it takes a while to get an answer together. Secondly, we throw these Mark 38 chain guns on ships, and we have 50 cows, and maybe you're lucky enough to have a Sea-Whiz 1B on your ship. Bottom line, they're all independently operated. It's not a system. There's no combat system there allowing remote operation of all those weapons in a synchronized fashion. It's Sailor Ted and Lieutenant Bafamata trying to make sure they got everything right. We can't do that. We've got to bring a systematized approach to self-defense also.
Thanks, Brian. Mr. Mann, I want to get your perspective on hypersonics and ballistic missiles threats to ships. People's Liberation Army has fielded numerous ASBMs, hypersonic glide vehicles of various kinds that can target ships. So what do you see as the key capabilities for countering these classes of threats? And then specifically wanted to ask you about a program that's received a fair amount of attention, which is the Glide Phase Interceptor program, where the 2024 NDAA called for accelerating the timeline for GPI from 2035 IOS in initial operational capability to 2029. And then the president's budget proposal for 2025 is cutting the budget for GPI. So you're being asked to do something faster at lower cost, which tends to be challenging unless you adopt a different approach. So what are your thoughts on this area more broadly, GPI, and then lastly, partnership with Japan? So I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
Holy moly, what the heck?
Take it on.
Oh my God. I'm gonna talk about torpedoes. Need to sustain the torpedoes we got. Okay, so that's a lot, man. Holy moly. All right.
There we go.
So what do I think about hypersonics? It's completely true that on planet Earth, there's adversaries that have been doing a lot of things in the hypersonic space for a long time. We have evidence. So this isn't a theoretical thing. It's a real thing. It's a real thing now. I'm proud to serve in an integrated air missile defense team now that has some limited hypersonic defense today. So very proud of all of you brilliant people who invented work in the sea-based terminal. It's a really hard problem, and we're trying to get after it. Yeah, it's a real dilemma that you outlined where there's a direction to go faster, and then there's also in managing risk, how do you measure your progress so you're not rushing to develop something that actually doesn't meet the requirement? So this is not going to be official. I don't know who's in the room, so I'll pretend I'm in an eclipse and I got vertigo. Here's what I would tell you. The GPI program is real. We're in it now. I'm very proud of the members of the team that have been working on this for the last 3 or 4 years. We're maturing really critical technologies. We're learning from really lots of different sources of information, including our OEMs. And so we're going to keep pressurizing them And it is never going to stop, and we never apologize for asking you repeatedly, how fast can you go? What can you do? When I served under the Undersecretary Ash Carter, he would talk about this concept. Instead of requiring and then acquiring, it was, what can you acquire? And let's study it, let's experiment, let's see if there's relevance to it, and then we'll write the requirement or we'll adapt it. Because if you keep writing something that's unobtainium, it just confounds everybody. A, you can't afford it, it doesn't arrive on time, and nobody is jazzed. That said, maybe that requirement is still valid. So in my brain, GPI, we've been working on it for years. We're going to keep working on it. You'll see a lot of progress this year. It's very important to us. We actually are in discussions with our partner nation, just like we co-developed SM32A. We are in discussions with our partner in Japan on the GPI. So there's work to be done, and we're in it now. That said, at the same time, I would tell all of you, if that's unobtainium in the arc of reason and you need something else, we all need to sharpen our pencils right now and ask, okay, what is that? What is it? Instead of just looking at it singularly, let's open up our aperture and consider all services, all ideas, and figure out a way to harness that which can be delivered in the time of relevance. And I don't know how that's going to play out. So I don't have a program for that. I could write a program for that. I need some bucks for that. But it just seems like this is the classic case of acquire and require. My last point is things really do change when we're attacked. And we're being attacked. And I just think that sense of urgency, public policy, national policy, it all evolves and pivots. So we'll see. Right now, we're trying to become as ready as possible to do something that's valuable in support of this requirement. Lastly, I said lastly twice. This is my last one. Lastly. This is really, really super hard. We thought ballistic missile targets were hard. We thought low elevation targets were hard in anti-air warfare. This maneuvering hypersonic thing is confounding and defying the laws of physics in so many ways. There's so much work to do, but it's not one team that's going to do it. This is going to be really an all-of-nation project. And I think there's pockets of it popping up all over. We just need to figure out how to bring it, harness it, and again, I'll leave you with the point, acquire what is unobtainable. I love the SCO team, Strategic Capabilities Office. They don't invent anything, but they adapt it. And they use stuff that already is on planet Earth, and they figure out a way to give it a little bit of military value. And I love it that will create doubt in our adversary, and making them pause is a good thing. This concludes my very short answer to your complicated question.
Thank you, Paul. As a follow-up, could I get your perspective from the industrial lens?
Sure.
RTX has done a lot of work with Japan, other international partners on co-development, co-production programs. What lessons have you drawn that could apply to GPI or programs more broadly?
Absolutely. Well, to tag on to that and then also add on to what Mr. Mann was alluding to, I think the whole industrial complex absolutely has to be lockstep with the customer, and I think we have to make sure that we understand the risk trade space that we're all trying to solve. I think when we sit down, oftentimes between the acquire, require, and acquire, we end up getting into silos, and the more that we can come together and look at what is the art of the possible on an accelerated timeline becomes even more relevant today. And when we talk about the challenges with hypersonics, sea-based terminal, I think there's been some great lessons we've learned collectively together as we've looked at how do we go faster, how do we do those cycles of learning as quick as we can, again, because we're sharing a common sight picture with a common goal and objective, or as we like to always call it, the North Star. I think when we look at hypersonics, I know from an industry, it is a really hard problem. We have problems seeing them, that's step one, but then once we can see them, how do we shoot something at them that can respond? And I think, in partnering as one of the industrial partners looking on GPI, how can we go faster and how do we have that relevancy? I think, Mr. Mann and I talked earlier this morning, we've been in this for a couple of years, and now we need to go as fast as we can to get that capability out there, because it will be the right answer if we have to go after those threats that are coming in. As it relates to international partners, I mean, I think, as we continue to look at the entire, partner industrial base across the globe, we do have a great amount of history with Japan on SM3 Block 2A. It was a great co-development led by, obviously, the US, partnering with them. And so we have found a lot of ways in which we can do a great partnership, whether it be on the effector side of the house. We have, obviously, lots of history with ESSM, a 12-nation consortium. We've got RAM, which is a partnership with Germany. I think there's so much that we can tap into. The technology and the capabilities with some of our allies that is really, really important, as well as, expand our industrial base. As we look at how do we make sure that we've got a assured source of supply, making sure we've got partners, whether it be domestically or internationally, that helps up our odds that we can deliver a capability to the customer on time, every time. And so that's why we think it's important to be looking at those industrial partners. And Japan is a critical one for us. We're also looking at how can we leverage them on our radar side of the business. So starting to branch into, how do we leverage some of the capabilities that they have in country for that as well.
Really impressive gallium nitride production, and they do in-house microchip production in many cases, some of those companies. So yeah, great opportunity there.
Absolutely.
I want to open up the floor to all of you. So I'd ask if you do have a question, if you can line up in the microphone there towards the center of the room and prepare to introduce yourself, say your name, your affiliation, and ask a question to our panelists. Before doing so, and while you guys think of a question, maybe line up with any questions that you have, I wanted to ask a question first to Kim and then open it up to Mr. Mann and then Brian if you have thoughts. And that has to do with cooperation between government and industry. Mm-hmm. Secretary Del Toro has publicly criticized the pace of delivery of different capabilities, the amount of investment companies are putting into developing capability. He's also publicly criticized large share buybacks that, to be frank, RTX has engaged in and now has a plan to do. So I wanted to get your perspective, Kim, on what do you view as promising approaches to government-industry partnership that allows you to lean forward and take risks and then actually get rewarded for that?
I think it's the sharing of where we need to have the capability and when. I think making sure that we are absolutely lockstep on what are the requirements for today's production numbers that we need to have in place, and where do we need to take the production numbers in the future. Case in point, Tomahawk. If we rewind the clock a couple of years ago, Tomahawk was zeroed out in the budget. Now we're talking about going to 600. So that's a lot of starts and stops. And I think the more that we can be absolutely aligned with what is that minimum base that we need to have, but then really where do we need to have the capacity and the capability, we in industry will absolutely invest in it and go off and do that. And we do that routinely. We're doing an expansion right now, soon to be announced, I should say, soon to be doing our groundbreaking down at Redstone, which is where we integrate Standard Missile 3, 6. We're obviously putting in capability for hopefully GPI in the future. But that's where industry is always leaning forward on how can we go out and have the capability, but we have to have at least a 3 to 5 year window that we can be in lockstep with the customers. And I know it's a challenge in the budget cycle that we all live in, right? I mean, we just got a budget approved a few weeks ago for FY24, and we're already, in the throes of it. So that's where it gets hard, and I know it's tough for our government customers to plan for that. But the more we can have that insight into it, the more that we can do the planning and make those investments to have the capability ready to support the warfighter needs.
As a quick follow-up, how do you decide, though, to make strong bets? When you think about IRAD within naval power,
Sure.
How are you thinking about, well, I'm going to increase the amount of IRAD spending I have, we're going to do this, and it's going to exceed perhaps the amount that my careers are doing, and how do you try to justify that to your boss then, and then shareholders of the company?
Well, I actually have my tech director sitting down here, so I'm sure he's going to be, grilling me. We always look at it. We look at, what are the current, and we have a big portfolio, and so obviously we do have to make trades just like our customers do. We look at, what are those products that are going to have continued, length and time out in, deployment? How do we make sure that it's relevant today? Where are we looking to increase capability and that marries up with what our customer needs are as well. And so then we go forward and say, hey, we want to place that bet. And if we think that there is a business case out there, we absolutely will take it forward from an IRAD perspective. Obviously, we try to look at is there things that are smart to co-invest in, right, from an IRAD development. But there's definitely things, I mean, all of industry looks at, where's our proprietary information, where's kind of that secret sauce that we bring that gives, the warfighters the technological advantage, and we're continually looking at how we can invest in those areas.
Thank you, Kim. Mr. Mann, you've had a great deal of success over the years working on the Joint Program Office for MRAP and other programs in terms of accelerating acquisition and introducing urgency. What do you think can work in this timeline where there is a demand for urgency, but it doesn't seem like our approaches are lining up?
Yeah, there's just one key thought that comes to my mind, is that I've seen so many PowerPoint presentations where everybody talks about, their plan to get to their place on the taco chip. And it's a waypoint. It's actually not what we need for the warfighter. When we did MRAP, we didn't grade. We tracked all of the steps, all in the process, but we measured ourselves on how many vehicles were in the hands of the warfighter and what is the readiness of those vehicles. I wish that the government and industry team could marshal resources to scorecard that and to show any obstacles to our mutual goal of warfighting capability, readiness, capacity, whatever that is. And together we incentivize on that and we grade ourselves on the result of our teamwork, not, hey, I executed the contract, I did my OBS and expenditures. It was very inspirational for industry and for the government to know we were having the effect at the place we wanted to have it. And boy, I wish we would do that here. So please, let's do that.
Thank you. Brian, you were on the Cava Ships podcast this week that I recommend to all of us today. And you shared, I think, some contrarian views on the relationship. If you can maybe share some of them with us today, please.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. And I'll probably demonstrate with great clarity why I am neither the Secretary of the Navy nor a president of a large division of a major defense contractor with this answer. The Department of Defense shaped and managed the defense industrial base over the course of 30 years to achieve efficient peacetime production. It did it on purpose. You've all heard of the Last Supper. Over time, the Department of Defense tried to drive cost out of the industrial base, and they succeeded. I don't know what you think Kim's margins are, but they're not as high as you think they are.
I promise you they're not as high as you think they are.
They're not as high as you think they are. Number one. Number two, we have spent decades telling the youth of this country that the only path to success and the only path to worth in this country is to go to college. We've done it to ourselves. We've gotten to a place, and then we had a global pandemic. So our defense industrial base, at a time when we wanted it to surge and increase in capacity, all of a sudden, after 30 years of, we'll give you just enough to keep the line on life support, all of a sudden, we need you. So when I hear my friend Carlos Del Toro, he was the first SEAL of my ship. I was third. He's my friend. I like Carlos. But he's wrong on this. His going after stock buybacks, I certainly don't understand why companies do it, but I don't care. I think they do it because they have a duty to their stockholders to show return on investment. Ultimately, that's not Carlos's call. It's not his job. My sense is if Carlos's eye turned back inwards on the Navy, he would find plenty to work on to help move this industrial base Navy relationship along. And that's why I'm not the Secretary of the Navy or President Raytheon.
We have questions now from the audience, please.
Mark Kennedy, the Wilson Center. We've all agreed that we need to have directed energy moving forward. What steps would you recommend to get that happening sooner rather than later?
Horseshot.
Number one, when we do analysis of alternatives for primarily air and missile defense, but it doesn't have to be air and missile defense. For requirements, we do apples to apples comparisons. We stop looking at a set of capabilities which have been invested in and lines of production for decades and decades, which we are, in general, making alterations to do new things very skillfully and very successfully. We're comparing those to something that we then say, oh my goodness, the NRE and the development costs to get lasers and directed energy and high-powered microwaves, it's just incredible cost. We'll go over here and build some more missiles. We have to try to find a way to even that out. We have to put the money into the research and the NRE and the development so that we get 300 to 500 kilowatt lasers, so that we get high-power microwave systems that can deal with UAVs at a reasonable range. But as long as we continue to have that contest as an apples versus apples, or apples to oranges comparison, directed energy is always going to lose. So that would be my number one recommendation.
Thanks, Brian. Kim or Paul, do you want to weigh in?
I'll just add that the rate of operational experience needs to increase. We've been in the S&T world and the labs. I'm very proud of what the Navy's been doing, but we need to do a lot more of it and just be disruptive and don't worry about the perfect outcome. They're still learning in the application of the technology, and why not experiment at a considerably higher rate?
Yeah, from an industry perspective, we would love to see more experimentation, get out of the PowerPoint slide.
I imagine by being able to split up the categories of threats, right, into different brackets where you don't need one class of directed energy weapon that handles it all. It allows you to introduce new systems, see how they work, and field capabilities faster. To the point you made earlier, Mr. Mann. Another question, please.
Yes, Roger Kylan, Systems Engineering Group. We actually do threat engineering for the Navy and Aegis BMD.
Are you going to attack me for my critique of your gear?
I'm going to try to ask a hard
If
question.
you could just try to get a little closer to the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. So I've been around the Aegis program for 20 years and have seen how we spec requirements and how the systems are developed. But to the point now of hypersonic vehicles and just the breadth of their capabilities that can't be represented in a handful of cases anymore. How do we need to change government requirements, and how does industry need to change their process to go after a threat that we can no longer say, here is the bucket it fits in?
Yeah, great question, and I'm not going to do it justice, but here's what I will tell you. I'm new to the Missile Defense Agency, 2 years new. Feels new. I feel like a shiny new toy. We used to really just we would pick the parameters, the detailed parameters of a threat, and then go confirm we could do that. I would tell you that takes too long, and it's unresponsive to a dramatically changing threat. So we better learn the same Monte Carlos that we do on analysis of what could happen in engagement. We've got to start parameterizing the threats and learning what we can. Again, I'll come back to my point on acquire, what can you do, and then keep iterating the requirement as you go. It seems to me fundamental that that's a faster path to progress than constantly studying an unobtainium, unaffordable thing. So that would be, and in fact, I think in GPI, I'm very proud of our approach. We have sort of a generic model, and we're parameterizing it to lay it on the industry representatives to try to handle a class of. It's not one thing that we want them to build a system. It's this family of things. And as we continue to learn, we'll continue to parameterize. Acquire, then require. That would be my approach. Thank you.
And from an industry perspective, I know we invest a lot in our modeling and simulation capability, right? So that we can look at, how can we do those kinds of sets and reps in a virtual environment so that we can see, do we have capability that can expand on a particular weapon that we may be designing, or a radar, whatever the system is that we're designing. I think the more we and government get comfortable with the results that are coming out of that virtual world, I think the faster we're all going to be able to go, because we still have, a lot of time that is spent during, the whole testing, the operational, that whole piece of the envelope. And the more that we can get comfortable with what these models, which are pretty advanced now, are starting to tell us, I think the quicker we can start to get capability out there. And I know it's an area we're investing heavily in at Raytheon.
Yeah, and I know it's not my term, but I'm just going to say experiment, experiment, experiment as well. We keep waiting to do these complex things or these complex tasks. We should be feeding an army of people that are working round the clock, 365, for years to learn what we can learn, and we're just not set up to do that. It's a different model.
And by that, you mean, I guess, experiment using virtual and constructive approaches, or just use the environment, track aircraft?
I think it's both. I think, quite frankly, we have, I don't think we have tapped into the true material science and experimentation of not only the primes, but small businesses across the United States. I think there's a lot that we can do for a lot less cost than is inherent in all of our programs. Absolutely.
Next question, please.
All right, thank you, Kurt Warden, Nova Power Solutions, former Surf 4 and 6 shop manager. But I want to come back to a comment that Mr. Mann had made earlier about bringing operators and engineers together and getting them to work together. It's a very important point, but my assumption is that you've stopped that at the government engineer, and I really want to kind of explore how do we get that information to the industry engineers, both at the prime and the subprime level, to allow them to make changes. And I know the Navy has information, because I used to put the information together, that would be valuable to industry that industry doesn't have access to.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've heard versions of what you just described over the last, even today and the last couple of weeks. This is something to me that's completely solvable. I know we have we build combat systems. We have a place up in Morristown, New Jersey. It's commanded by a tech rep. And we even, basically people who served on surface ships go there and become the evaluators and the code developers under tech rep. I know under Admiral Marks that they're sending WIDIs and embedding them with the teams as we're doing developments. I think we can do that, and we're doing it. I'm not smart enough to know how far we've infiltrated that, but to me it's fundamental. I've seen so many engineers that are developing algorithms, and those engineers, and they're super smart and great coders, they don't have a clue on how the system is going to be used. And I think that we've got to build a bridge for the engineers to learn the operations. And so I'll also say that I'd like to get all of the engineers that are in the industry, get out of your computers and go get on a surface combatant. And I don't know how to do that. We used to do C-squats and DTs and OTs, and we do it in parts. But to me, we need to, long ago, the Aegis folks, they rode ships for a long time. They literally were embedded with the crews on the whole system on how it operates. I think that model could really be regenerated. Over. I'm going to try to cause part of it in my shop, but and if it's contagious, that's fantastic. But I don't know why we don't connect the engineers to the warfighters and back and forth. It's a system with human operators that are trying to figure out how to use a complex system. I think your question is great. We have examples that witty concept is really making dramatic progress, but I don't know if it's enough or if we've gone far enough. Over.
I think if there's any final questions, you can line up behind the mic. I'll ask one now, particular to Kim and Brian and Mr. Mann, if you want to weigh in, please do so. And has to do with, I think, the evolution of air and missile defense, but warfare more broadly, it's increasingly shifting towards passive sensing, multi-static sensing. Counter-ISR capabilities are becoming increasingly important, and more we have to fight as a systems of systems that's going to require more uncrewed assets playing the roles as decoys, effector launch platforms, sensors. What approaches do you view as viable for either fielding some of those classes of uncrewed systems or the payloads that would go on them more quickly?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at, for instance, from like the radar perspective, there's a lot that we're doing in the SPY-6 family to really tap into, to your point, that ability to do distributed maritime operations. SPY-6 was designed to have the capability to scale it down, right? So you can have a couple of the back-end pieces on one of those, what we would call an attritable or unmanned vehicle to operate in a different mode. And so we're continually looking at that, in concert with the Navy on how do we maybe go about, starting to do some experimentation in that domain, as well as continuing to advance the capabilities so that even as we start to get more SPY-6s out there, you'll be able to distribute and do certain things in a different way. And then we're looking at it also for, containerized capabilities of, any of the effectors that we deliver. Again, how do you kind of play a hide and seek game so that, the adversary doesn't know which ones are just containers, which ones are actually loaded with capability. So that's something we continually look at and are starting to deploy.
Brian, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, we're interested in this systematic approach to warfighting, or the system of systems approach to warfighting. We all know it's coming. We all think it's the wave of the future. Yet we are constrained by our current requirements and acquisition bureaucracy from addressing that. We don't have an organization that can do that kind of systems architecture across multiple domains and multiple mission areas. Even if that organization existed, who would it hand those requirements to? They would be acquired in little chunks. I think we need to paint the locomotive we need to create the locomotive as it moves down the track, because the threat is that important, is that serious. We have to be able to address where the bureaucracy, and listen, I'm not a hater of bureaucracies. Bureaucracies, when they work really well. But it's not working right now, and I'd like it to work better. So we need to be able to address bureaucratic reform, real bureaucratic reform. Not eliminate one OpNav directorate and bring another one back. That's not bureaucratic reform. But get to a point where we look at systems engineering holistically across the ensemble and actually allocate functionality where it makes the most sense, and then budget accordingly. That's not what we do right now, or at least we do that sometimes within the stovepipes of excellence, but once we try to go stovepipe to stovepipe, it doesn't happen.
As we get ready to close, do any of you have some final thoughts you want to share with us?
We can start down on that end if you want.
You want to start from this end?
Yeah.
Okay. Winter is coming. Whether it's 2027 or 2032 or whatever it is, and whether it's China or Russia, it doesn't matter. The scope of history tells us we will be fighting someone in the future. Are we going to be ready for that future? Are we going to mortgage that future so that we can be hyper ready for next year? I don't think we are being serious enough to face the challenges that are right here in our face and screaming at us about the future. We're not serious yet. Thank you.
Mr. Mann.
Yeah, I'm just so proud of all the humans that I encounter in support of integrated air and missile defense, distributed maritime ops, with all of our self-critiques, which are serious at times. We're producing really extremely complex systems that do amazing things for our sailors, so that's a good thing. My final piece would be, is that anything that I've ever seen massively change for the good is when we get aligned on the outcome we're trying to generate, as opposed to individual self-interest along the way. And I know that's really hard to do, but when the shooting starts, the urgency grows, and we all need to come together and bring our best value to the outcome we're trying to generate. And that's what I think will happen. That's what we're trying to generate. So for all of you that are contributing, keep rocking. Thank you.
And I would just add, for us, at least from my lens in the industrial base, the collaboration and the transparency is critical. To your point, the sense of urgency, it's here now. And I think for us to get after solving the hardest problems, we have to absolutely be collaborating, understanding what it is we're trying to solve, and we have to be transparent in how we have to get there together. And so, as an industrial partner, we always look to that relationship to be incredibly strong, so that we can deliver for you all as fast as we can. So I think that's something I would continue to advocate for, is we just have to keep that partnership up so we can all be successful.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Kim, Paul, and Brian, and thank you all for making the time. I know it's late
Thank you.
on a day where we have no clips.
Thank you.
Exactly.